and good evening. Welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. If you're new to the channel, thank you for coming through and checking us out. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Also, TIR news, if you haven't seen it yet, Jean Bajlan has a new piece in Sublation magazine titled A Popular Opinion for Abortion. There should be a link to the description wherever you are watching this show. Also, speaking of Sublation, before we left for New York City, we did an interview with Doug Lane about the latest video essay, Same as It Ever Was. And that conversation is up on Doug Lane's channel. Also, we'll be airing this show on Sublation's Facebook page. Some of you may be watching from Sublation's Facebook page, hopefully reading and sharing Jean Bajlan's latest piece. Speaking of show appearances, my co-host was just on a program today. I don't know if it aired today. So let's bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
A popular struggle. I don't know why. I was thinking Popular Front. It was time when I was your episode up from yesterday. Yeah.
By the way, the Mama Hour went well yesterday. It was very good. Yeah.
I saw a little bit of it as I was stuck in horrible LA traffic.
I hope you enjoyed what you watched.
I did. I got to hang out with Bertram Cooper.
Oh, yesterday. I'd like to hear about that. We can talk about that. But I was on Kyle Kalinske and Crystal Ball's podcast today. They interviewed me for an hour. The link will be up on Saturday. They should be having me up on Saturday, so they're going to be doing editing. But it was a really good episode. They asked a lot about politics, our show, what our position is in terms of, working within the Democratic Party, where they asked general questions about where I see politics today and, what is the revolution's position. And I talked a lot about how we view the politics of America within the context of the 50-plus year counter-revolution. There's some really good general kind of questions about how we view the political moment. And it was really good, man. They were very friendly. They were very nice. I appreciated appearing on their program. They both volunteered to come on and be guests at any time.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we're in an interesting political moment, man. I was talking with Bertram about this yesterday, and there's a new. I'll tell you about it off air. There's a new person that's going to be helping us out with some video stuff, so I'm very excited about that. I'll tell you about this young brother off air. I didn't get a chance to talk to you today, like I would like to have, but it was kind of eye-opening, hanging out with Burgess and being in that scene of these. I wouldn't necessarily call them right-wingers now. These people that were fans of like Tim Pool and Project Veritas. I think we're in this era of kayfabe, as they say in wrestling, where everyone knows everything is fake. I mean, you've mentioned it before. No one trusts politicians. A lot of people.
That's just a legitimacy
in certain government institutions, right? And there's also kind of a distrust of corporate America as well. And people are looking for truth tellers, and we're in this era of kind of anti-hero truth tellers that a lot of people feel are bipartisan in their reporting. Like Tim Pool saying that he reads two types of news and then decides what the truth is. These two types of news, as if there's all these sites like the Washington Examiner and Jacobin are writing the same pieces, like they're very different sites by their very nature. So there's no way that this person can read the same story in multiple places like that and then decipher what the truth is. It's just silly to think that way. But even looking at someone like Joe Rogan, who also has this kind of approach to the world where they don't necessarily have a political ideology that they stand behind. They kind of stand behind the idea of being kind of bipartisan and constantly looking for a capital T truth. So it's really an interesting moment, especially when we think about political figures, because there's still a narrative built around they let us down. I saw I think you told me he was one of your favorite journalists, Elie Mystal.
No, how are you joking me? No, not one of my favorite journalists at all.
That
Who
is a
follows
joke,
me on
everyone.
social
I'm
media?
totally messing with you guys. That is not at all what Pascal said. But he tweeted out something today, along the lines of basically along the lines of the Democratic Party is letting us down, the leadership is letting us down, and it makes me feel as if people have to look to these quote unquote elected leaders as the harbingers of truth, almost. Like, this is, I talked about it in the idea of needing a hero in that video essay. We don't need another hero. Like, Joe Biden was never going to be FDR. He's never been anything but who he is, right?
Right.
Barack Obama was never JFK in blackface.
But yet they were marketed as such in various periods of times.
Yeah, and people need these heroes, because when you get let down by the idea of Bill Clinton not being as perfect as you assumed he was, or by the idea of Obama not being Martin Luther King as president, someone has to be your leader. So that kind of, for me personally, that's the political moment that I feel that we, and in fear as well, feel that we're in right now. I don't know if you feel the same way.
No, I think that there's a long history of that trajectory in American politics. I would somewhat argue maybe even goes back to FDR. Some would argue maybe it goes back to Lincoln. That this need to have a kind of salvational figure,
Yeah.
be traditionally a man, traditionally a kind of patriarchal figure, to be the one to lead us out of this kind of morass that we're in, a kind of great man theory of history. And there is a lot of that. I mean, some would argue that maybe it comes out of like the Abrahamic tradition of the kind of looking for the prophet to be the
Messianic figure.
messianic figures, etc. So things of
Would
that
you
nature.
agree though? And I'm working on a piece that I'm gonna be submitting to Sublation about this. But would you agree though that these people in this moment, and I kind of I've been comparing it to wrestling, and I know you're not a big wrestling guy, but humor me for a moment. I still know you know who these people are. When wrestling had this moment where there was this thing called the Montreal screw job, where a certain wrestler named Bret Hart feels that he was screwed out of his title, right?
Right.
And it's silly to think of it like that, because you're given the title. You're picked as the guy that's going to be the face of the league, whatever you want to call it, the franchise, because you're the guy that sells the tickets, right? You put the butts in the seats. And because of that, you get kind of awarded with this title. But it's titular. You didn't really earn it. I mean, you earned it in the sense that you worked, but you didn't beat up a bunch of people and then earn it. You're given it. And after that moment, we lead into what's called the Attitude Era, where wrestling kind of becomes less about guys' ability to really work and wrestle in the ring, and it's more about characters. Hulk Hogan becomes a quote unquote bad guy with dye their facial hair black, and The Rock, and you get Stone Cold Steve Austin, drinking beer. Triple H, yeah. Andy Williams says like some Triple H shit. Like, yeah, that like it just moves in a different direction, and then you get Vince McMahon becoming the character that we now see with who Donald Trump later became. Remember, Donald Trump never really was a villain. He thought he was more like a Gatsby character, rich guy.
Right.
And he just never really got into New York high society. He never got the love from that New York high society that he wanted. Watch old interviews with him on Letterman in the early to mid 80s, where he's real shy and coy. about, him being a billionaire. He wasn't a billionaire bad boy, so to speak, right? Even watch him in movies like Home Alone. That's Vince McMahon that shows him that this rich guy, leader of the evil empire, is going to be the character that puts him over the top. So in a moment where the ratings for WWE were dropping, Vince McMahon becomes the head villain, and there's kind of just despicable characters within what he's trying to do. And then you later see Donald Trump start to pick up this idea of being the boss and the bad guy. That's all Vince McMahon. That's all his relationship with Vince McMahon, and actually is a thing that takes him over the top. And thinking about that kind of transformation for even a person like Trump, and he takes that all the way to the freaking White House.
Reality show TV star becomes president.
Because he's the truth-telling bad guy. He is the true anti-hero. He's going to tell it like it is, even if you don't like it. So I don't know. That's where I've been thinking about. I don't know if you feel the same way about that, but I've definitely.
Well, that definitely was part of his appeal, right? The fact that I'm from outside of the system, which qualifies me to tell you the truth about how it really is not working for you.
And that's what these people do. When I was at the Ben Burgess thing, they are they're busting out regular people. They're busting out the working class for major corporations. But the people watching it don't see it that way. They see it as them being truth tellers, because they think, I would never incriminate myself even on a hidden camera because I'm not doing anything wrong. They don't understand like the nature of the questions or gotcha questions, and the way it's framed is, to incriminate people. Like, people don't really get it.
What's interesting to the metaphor that you paint about WWF is that this whole phenomenon, right, has a WWF kind of element to it completely. That kind of like debate bro culture, like we all get together in a ring in a location in New York City and we hash it out like it's some kind of like WWF type of like, we didn't have these personalities having major functions around debate and political discourse like this, say, in the earlier aughts. Now there's a whole spectacle. There's a whole like event of like, oh, Jordan Peterson is coming. I was like, oh, like, Ben Burgess is debating like, XY Tim Pool, or so now there's a whole spectacle around our politics that reduces it to this kind of like WrestleMania nature, which is even outside of the actual politics that we have. So it's become an entertainment industrial complex in and of itself. And again, I think it's just another way of, of someone said a carnival atmosphere, exactly, of really just delegitimizing the seriousness of the politics. And I also think in some ways it alienates the capacity of citizens to take what we're saying seriously, because it renders it to entertainment.
I mean, think about the fandom around elected officials. I'm not talking mayors, because traditionally mayors can be almost a little circus-like, in my opinion. You're from New York City. I've always known who the mayor of New York City was ever since I was cognizant of television, because the mayor of New York City has always been a bit of a celebrity, from Ed Koch to Giuliani. And so, even where I'm from in San Francisco, the mayor is kind of a big deal, right? George Moscone. Wasn't Feinstein mayor for a minute?
Willie Brown.
Oh God, just big personalities, right? This is a position where there's usually big personalities. But congressmen and having fans, that ain't politics. You know what I mean? And that's the moment that we're in right now, which feel like watching Tulsi Gabbard get on stage and people just go crazy over her. No one's going crazy over her politics, and she didn't say anything. She's got fans. So for me personally, it's a scary time to be alive. That being said, also guys, can you please give it up a warm welcome for everyone's favorite faceless chat moderator, M Tucson.
Hello. I actually do have a face. You just can't see it. Isn't it funny how that works?
I didn't introduce you at the show on Sunday either.
No, you didn't.
You a secret, our little chocolate secret.
Yeah, I'm a McCain's kid.
Wow.
That's secret. Well, I would like to say
that a rumor. That's the new rumor.
It's terrible. You know, Jane Fonda had a secret daughter too.
Who?
She adopted a little black girl. Mm-hmm.
Who had a secret daughter?
Jane Fonda.
Jane Fonda
had a secret daughter.
Well, she didn't want to, put it in the limelight, put it in the media.
Are you telling me that she biologically gave birth to a child?
No, she adopted a little girl who's now a grown woman. And
Jane Fonda?
Yeah. People didn't know about it.
Did she adopt a black person when it wasn't cool?
It was probably cool when she did it. But she didn't want, a spectacle. Why are we talking about this? My money's on Pascal. I just want everyone to know that.
You brought it up. How's it my fault?
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Well, let's bring in our guest. If you're a patron of the show, you've seen this man in the champagne room many times. Being that we haven't had him on in a while, I felt we needed an entire show dedicated to catching up on the politics of Latin America. Please welcome our favorite Peruvian journalist, the Camilo Gómez.
Hi. It's always a pleasure being here.
Camilo, I'm gonna open up with what everyone wants to talk about. A lot of people in left circles were ecstatic when the former teacher in Campesino won the presidential election, Pedro Castillo. It was viewed as a enormous win for a resurgent left that was actually dealing with defeat here domestically at the time. That was a year ago. What is going on with Peru and Pedro Castillo now?
Yeah, I think what it got missed, I guess, in kind of translation was the fact that a lot of the divisions that were in the left were also present in his campaign from the beginning. So his party has divided, and now today exactly, he has resigned from his party. So in some ways, like the specter of possibilities remains very, very big, because who is going to back him, and it's difficult to explain, but I feel in many ways like something probably that was the bigger difference with Keiko Fujimori is that he was seen as the anti-establishment, and in the country most affected by the pandemic in Latin America, like it was something really relevant, because like the bad management that the country had led to a high fatality. So he was also more pro-vaccine, which the rival campaign of Keiko Fujimori was kind of more skeptic, like more right wingers have been generally. So I guess the success of the government have been the vaccination process, which has been relatively very functional. And well, sometimes like when one says Latin American standards are sometimes low, in vaccination, actually, like Latin America has vaccinated the majority of this population. So even by among countries that have vaccinated a lot of the population, like Peru has done well. But a lot of problems have been plagued his administration, because a lot of the ministers he has named have been indicted either of corruption, of incompetence. So his government has been a lot of chaos, and I think in part has to do that he built himself as the anti-establishment candidate, and in many ways he was, but by putting like anybody like without experience just because he knew them, it didn't mean that the state was going to work functionally. Also, that the fact that the opposition has been relentless, and it didn't even want to acknowledge the results of the election, and the press is much more against him. I think that in other countries in Latin America, where sometimes the press could lean more to the right, but here is more of basically all mainstream media, with the exception of one newspaper, leans to the right. So it's basically a combination of mistakes in part of his administration, his party being very inconsistent and many times voting with the right-wing bloc, but also on the fact that there is a press that seems like focused on trying to oust him of office rather than to inform what's going on.
Did you want to follow up, Pascal?
Yes. How organized is the left in terms of addressing some of these inconsistencies in terms of the actual grassroots? Are there grassroots mobilizations that are able to kind of ring him in when he deviates as an administration? How organized are the left? Is the left in these spaces?
Well, isn't he kind of a counter to his party in a lot of situations politically?
Yes, and that wasn't even his party. So the issues, he was a union leader of one of the alternative teachers unions, because he's a teacher. So in that sense, even like he's an outsider, because the main teachers union also kind of sees with him with distrust. So the he tried to create his own party, but in the context of the pandemic, he wasn't able to get the signatures to do the inscription. So like Perú Libre, which was a regional party, like it was a left-wing party, but it's mostly regional. It was in the center of Peru. It put him as candidate, basically, like as an invited candidate. And many argue that like, they weren't expecting like him to win, just to have some seats in Congress, and it happened because the regional governor of Huancayo, which is a region in the center of Peru, in Junín, the he couldn't run for president, so it was that impossibility which led to Pedro Castillo running. So it generated, in some ways, it is curious, because in some ways kind of mirrors the Vladimir Cerrón, which was the candidate, was supposed to be the candidate, because he also appeared like kind of an inspiring figure, in the sense he was a doctor, and he had been doing some efforts kind of community health, and Castillo, like that was kind of relatable, but with the time it became kind of unpopular. And Castillo, like, well, people knew him vaguely as a teacher, a leader of a teacher union, also was not necessarily that much known. So in some ways, it was much more of an anti-establishment figure, and they were at odds on different things. But I feel that one particularity of both Perú Libre and Pedro Castillo is that, unlike many other parts of other organizations among the left, they are more socially conservative. So that is something that has generated a lot of curiosity, but also has to do that they they see a lot of social liberalism in a curious way as kind of um, a product of capitalism in some way. So I guess they have a kind of anti-capitalist explanation for being against social liberalism, but even there are much more divergent. I think some of the younger members of the organization are much more supportive, but I guess it's more of an age kind of gap in some ways. So yeah, it's kind of, it was always a tense relationship between the party and him, but now it kind of has broke, even if they had more similarities that it could have been imagined.
Do you think that the allegations that he was involved in the criminal conspiracy in terms of public works projects is something that's being concocted by his opposition, or do you think there's any truth to that? Because that was something he was facing in terms of the being surfaced in the media in June as well. Are there any basis to these allegations?
Yes, I think there are bases of the allegations, but I feel like it's repeating like what happened with Lula, which is kind of a forced indictment. So it basically in Brazil, Sergio Moro like forced the kind of all the legal system to indict um, uh, uh, Lula. So I think in many ways it's kind of like the investigation in theory should follow, but all basically are making a pre-statement. So I think there are indications of corruption in his government, even if him not personally, like of several people very close to him, like his presidential advisor as well as a former minister are currently under investigation. But the issue is that obviously the press that is aligned with the right wing opposition and the right wing opposition itself are trying to already kind of indict him even before the kind of judicial process has been done.
But wouldn't you say the way we view the word corruption, I think from the U.S. lens, is a little different than the way it's viewed from the Latin American lens?
Yeah, I think there is a Peruvian political scientist which is called Farid Kahati, who has a theory that is that corruption is more perceived in moments of economic downturn. So now that obviously because of the rising prices, both product of the pandemic, but also of the war in Ukraine, has led to like a much more focus on how the economy is doing, and I think it is those kind of moments that led to an interest in those allegations, but also it is that interest that bring the interest in the case Lava Jato, because when the case Lava Jato exploded, it was when the economic growth it was starting to fall. So around 2014, like the economic growth that had been like the previous decade started to slow down, and in that context, like a lot of the allegations were seen much more interesting to a lot of the public that wanted to relate the situation, even if not always completely accurate, but the economic downturn with corruption.
I don't know if you ever read the Alpha Bunga Bunga guy's book, The End of History, but they have a great chapter on corruption, because I think one of them, Alex Hakuli, lives in Brazil, and there's actually a really great analysis I felt they had on this idea of corruption. But the political world in which we live in is always a world where, the government is always going to be working in unison with private business. And there's always going to be some sort of corruption in these relationships. Um, some countries, I think, look at it a little different, like you're talking about with Brazil and Lava Jato, where I forget how many hundreds of people got indicted. Because no one ever talks. Everyone always talks about Lula, but there was a lot of people, especially from the Workers' Party, that were indicted during that time.
Yeah, it did involve Fujimori. Like Keiko Fujimori is currently investigated for receiving money from Lava Jato. So
Jesus.
I think it is kind of horseshoe theory, but it was a construction company that tried to influence people in several countries. So like in some places, it kind of worked where with the candidates they feel could win the elections. So it tried to influence even before they were in office. So yeah, it was a case that has in many ways marked a lot of the present in Latin America. I feel that the issue with corruption, I feel it is quite curious because it has been tried to be made a case that particularly now that it's coming like the some Chinese companies, but it has happened with different kind of corporations from different origins. There have been like a lot of corruption allegations against Swiss firms, for example, like which people don't associate necessarily Switzerland with corruption, but a lot of their mines are actually the most polluting ones in in the region. So it is curious that.
Did you want to elaborate on that, Pascal?
No, I mean, believe me, man. As someone who has family that comes from, the global South, I'm beyond aware of how charges and allegations of corruption can be used against popular figures to try to delegitimize their attempts to work for the proletarian masses or the people as well. But at the same time, I'm also aware that there are certain ways in which figures from these parts of the world can use the let's say the charismatic leadership role to engage in more extra normative governing styles that may be questionable in nature as well. So I mean, I'm going to leave it up to Camilo to really kind of legitimize the veracity of these allegations, but at the same time, we do know that like Brazil is a perfect example of how the neoliberals and the corporatists were trying to use these leverage these allegations of corruptions to delegitimize the left government, which is something that is very, very common. So I definitely understand the sensitivity to these charges without a doubt. But at the same time, what exactly are there, and then back to my question, is that are there forces to the left of Camilo that are trying to keep him in check?
You mean Castillo?
Castillo, excuse me, Castillo.
Because no one's to the left of Camilo.
I'm sorry, Castillo.
Yeah, I think it is curious now because a lot of people even question whether Pedro Castillo is on the left, but because a lot of his views and a lot of issues are all over the place. But I think something that is curious was that this week there was a massive protest of different kind of small organizations, but it was really large compared to the protests that have going in the from the position that is more organized, that has support of the media. Even they print large advertisements from their protests in the newspaper. So one will think that protests that are well funded, had a lot of monetary support behind it, like will be able to have a massive support, but they haven't. And these protests that are more than pro Castillo are calling for against Congress. So the Congress, because it's led by the opposition, the right wing opposition, is very unpopular. It is like people really hate it, and a lot of people are calling for the close of Congress, which technically is constitutionally. I know it's not that democratic, and it has a kind of a procedure, but also people are calling for a constitutional assembly, like in Chile. Like there is an attempt to move from the constitution of of Fujimori. So that is like, but the issue is a lot of these organizations are very small. So it's very difficult to really like perceive what is kind of their goal, because one thing that it has been also clear is that in rural parts of Peru that there is kind of an opposition to the right, but it's less, I guess, organized, which is probably what defined the election, which is the support, particularly in the rural south, where the left is stronger. There is a vague idea of the left, but they're less organized. So it's kind of complex. There is I guess a will for more radical politics, but at the same time, like there is not the organization to kind of canalize those protests. So it's kind of I think the possibility of a constitutional assembly is curious, because in the beginning it was mostly supported by the more radical left. But I think at this point, because the right-wing Congress wants to do a lot of reforms, it could be even supported by more liberal or more centrist or even more apolitical people in general, because they will prefer someone else rather than Congress doing reforms in the Constitution.
Interesting.
Well, also, I wanted to ask you about everybody's favorite topic, which is, again, very similar to Peru. There was all these victory laps being run in leftist circles when Castillo became president, and a feeling of a new quote unquote pink wave.
Pink tide.
Let's just say wave, because we don't want to call it. Let's just wave. Let's wave it.
Wave better than tide.
Yeah, it's a nice wave. Can't necessarily surf on it, but you can boogie board on it. Colombia has a leftist leader, a self-proclaimed leftist leader, that definitely has a vice president that is apparently personal friends with the Jamu Baraka, correct?
That is correct. I told you we could try to get a Jamu on to discuss.
I think Jamu's moved past us, man. Jamu's on bigger. She's on Brianna Joy now, so he ain't.
Oh man, we can get a Jamu, man. We can get a Jamu, man.
But what's your take on the current situation in Colombia?
Yeah, I think it is a historic result, in the sense that in Colombia, like, the left never had won before, and obviously because the situation with the like literally like the FARC, the ELN, and the ML19, like obviously like like Marxist guerrillas like committing terrorist acts is not helping the cause, but also when
you mean Marxist coke dealers are not a good thing?
Yeah,
Marxist coke cartel.
Yeah, but the issue is, like, when there was attempts of candidates from the democratic left, like that tried to run for election and like follow the democratic process, they were actually killed, and many times by the paramilitary, like, which has its tie with the state, as the Truth Commission seems to be indicating. So it is also a more kind of complex tale. In many ways, probably this victory is founded on the peace deal that was signed on the by curiously a right-wing government. So, but this peace deal was opposed by the far right, and generated, like, the FARC, at least, like, had were disbanded itself. Like, they are now a political party, although they don't have much support. And as that, they probably like that fear of terrorism, like that has been used in many parts of Latin America, and try to tie it to the left. It kind of fade in many ways. Even if the in also the right wing media was trying to like not like waste any moment to mention that Gustavo Petro was a former guerrilla fighter. So it was not something like that um, disconnected. Like the idea that guerrillas and the electoral left were not completely without any link, but that people move on, and the issue, I think, also, which is very interesting, was the Francia Marquez, which was the vice presidential candidate. So Gustavo Petro had already been a congressman, had already been a mayor of Bogota, which is the capital and largest city of Colombia. But Francia Marquez really surprised many people, because even if she was a well-known activist, like many people were thinking that she was going to have less support, and in the presidential primaries she garnered a lot of votes, and that second to Gustavo Petro, and then in the she was the vice presidential candidate of Gustavo Petro in the general elections. I think the issue is very curious, because the topic on which Gustavo Petro may diverge with the rest of the Latin American left is that he seems much more, at least until now, committed to kind of a more green politics, in the sense of kind of wanting to limit pollution and things like that, and that is complex in a country like Colombia that depends on oil and also mining, or also our extractive activities. So it's going to be complex. Also, some people will have think that he, coming from the guerrilla movement, will have more divergent position on social issues, but he is, I will say, a fairly progressive politician on social issues, which is also interesting. I think in many ways it is kind of surprising, like the candidate that passed in the second round recognized very quickly his defeat. Unlike in Peru, like Keiko didn't want to concede defeat, and there seems to be a mood in Colombia to move on, and in some ways Gustavo Petro and the left are part of that, moving on from the situation of violence to kind of the hope of development.
Well, then how does that then work then? Because we talk about this often here. When you have a right wing that's so kind of embedded, right? Not just in government, but also within the military and in the paramilitary militias. What is the strategy? Are you going to try to kind of corral these guys in, or is it to try to include them into the system?
To be honest, that's a good question. I don't think the left really has done that much of a job. In Chile, I will say the left is even more organized than in other countries. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, like, they are having actually problems with the police, because they are not supporting Boric, and they are kind of like they don't like him. And it's complex. The military, I think, it depends on the country, and in Colombia, it's kind of particularly right wing, and actually that's the part of the reason, like they were recruited by military mercenary organizations, because in other countries some part of the military have been more left leaning, Also not much, but at least factions. So particularly in the Cold War era or the post-Cold War era, like some still had the Cold War mentality, so they will prefer kind of hiring people that have fought against guerrillas, right, than people that might have some sympathy to them. So that's actually the reason why Colombians have been uh, quite numerous in the private military sector, basically. So um, but in Colombia too, like the issues of police brutality and in the victory, there was a portrait of a man that was killed in the protest. So yeah, the police and the military are fairly repressive and particularly powerful because they have been trained and have a mentality to fight against terrorism. But like the as the political science was saying, basically no country has militarized police to deal with regular protests. Like it was not even like there have been in Latin America larger protests that it was just the police, regular police that was. But in Colombia, it's basically the militarized police that deals with protests, which leads to a much violent repression in our context.
Well, how much leeway is Gustavo Petro going to have to really ameliorate the condition of the country? According to reports, Colombia is considered to be the most unequal country in Latin America. A third of its population lives below the poverty line. And we know that with such a reactionary history, with the right being in bed with the U.S., the State Department, American intelligence agencies, it's going to be ripe for not only a Biden administration that has demonstrated so much hostility to the Latin and South American leftist projects to try to undermine this achievement. How much leeway is President Petro going to have to be able to implement any kind of materialist agenda outside of this kind of green kind of discourse to redistribute wealth in a way that's going to benefit the majority of the people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think he has more support. I think Colombia, what Colombia do has other countries don't have is kind of a liberal wing of politics, which I guess is slightly larger, and some of them have backed him even from the beginning, more or less. Um, so I suppose in some ways more moderate forces could try to maybe support him on some issues. I think it's going to be curious because even Uribe, which is kind of this icon of the far right, before the far right was kind of there was a global far right, there was Uribe, which in many ways was kind of the entire opposition to Petro also was very quick on accept the results. And I think it has to do that, like in some ways also I feel, and this could tie to other topics, that the business class has seen the price and instability in like it happens in Ecuador and Peru, like where there is much more instability. So I think at least part of the business class is going to try to, at least at the beginning, give him the benefit of the doubt. But it's true that some of the more radical projects, which I guess it has to do much more with the issue of environmentalism rather than, I mean, he wants to raise taxes, but it's not as radical as some like expropriations. He's not talking about like what I guess Venezuela like is the most radical example. But I think like many politicians, he's going to have a lot of difficulties. But the difference between him and others is that he has been both a congressman and a mayor, so he has much more experience, and in that sense, he has an advantage.
You brought up Venezuela, and I know you're trying to use it as an example. Real quick, because I also, before we go up, I'm hoping, and I don't know if we will be able to get into, I want to talk about Ecuador, but we might have to do that for the bonus champagne room. Post, I almost said Castro. Oh God, post Chavez. What is your take on the Maduro government in this
Yeah,
book.
it's curious because it's liberalizing a lot of the economy. So a lot of the press is covering that there is business are back and things like that.
Mhm.
And actually some Venezuelans that live in Peru have returned to Venezuela. So I guess there's part of the story is correct. But also, like if one follows the news at the border, there are a lot of Venezuelans trying to cross the United States. So I guess I am not sure if the path has been directly let's go from wherever we were in Latin America to Venezuela. It's not as it was painted. Then let's try to go to the U.S. But yeah, a lot of the migrant caravans are now led by Venezuelans, and sometimes they are the majority number, which is kind of curious because like obviously Venezuela is much further away from the U.S. than Central American countries, where it was generally in the past a larger share. So it seems that the economy isn't doing as good as curiously the press has been pointed out, but at the same time, like the 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 possibility of particular normalization of commerce with the West uh, could lead to kind of their main sector was obviously petroleum, like to be back, like and that could lead to a relative prosperity in if there is really if the sector goes back, like it's at one point Venezuela was the wealthiest country in Latin America. It was very unequal, but it by on general terms, uh, because of the price of oil, it kind of had at least it was less extreme the kind of poverty that with time it kind of appeared.
I mean, it's interesting because we were talking about corruption earlier, and when talking about Venezuela, I always see in a lot of I don't watch every single left show that talks about Venezuela, but you always hear about the U.S. sanctions, and that's definitely a problem to govern when you have sanctions that hard. But there also, were some serious problems when you talk about corruption as far as who was getting elected to certain positions, if they had even experience in certain government positions. And definitely there's been problems with the way Maduro handled inflation. But what I'm even hearing from people that I actually know that live around here in Venezuela is that the economy is doing better, and they were even taking U.S. dollars, like that's what they were paying for things, and it was dollars, so it was doing better, but it was just really a lot more expensive. Have you been hearing something similar to that?
Yeah, so basically the economy in Venezuela has been dollarized, but in an informal way. So because of the inflation, they had been used dollars, but also that has generated like a situation which makes change very difficult. So uh, I feel that one of the elements central in the corruption in Venezuela has been the military, which also in that case, like when Hugo Chavez was able to defeat kind of the coup, he also bring with him like the military, but the military wanted to get into the contracts and all of this. So the military, like some argue that the reason why the military don't want to give up on Maduro is because they are already very deep down into the kind of corruption scandals, because like they have been a
They're
central part
integrated
of.
into the system. I mean, I
Yeah.
think, but I would say, and this is from my kind of small knowledge of Venezuela, a lot of it coming from Rupert's book. Um, wouldn't you say that Chavez's whole program was to truly integrate the military into kind of everyday society and into the government, which of course worked out for him um, when there was the attempted coup in 2003? Or do you see that it's just problematic all the way around, like we were saying earlier, when it comes to the corruption?
It's curious because when he was the issue and the difference with him and others is that he come from the military, so there were people that when the coup happened, like supported him, like on the troops. Although some of them, like with the time, like kind of part ways with him. But I think the Bolivarian project, by name it as Bolivar, it had a much more um, kind of military reference and relevance. So I think in that sense, it kind of was very central, and I think it's like even like the Chinese military trains in Venezuela, like because like the the military has a very low is very well trained and has a lot of equipment. Like Venezuela is one of the countries that is on the defense sector. It has largest spending in Latin America. So it has become a central element of Venezuela, and I think that has made a quite particularly context.
Is that I mean, Pascal, do you think that's a good strategy for a left movement to actually integrate with
It's
the
a good way if
military
you
and
want to
try
make sure you can neutralize your opposition. I mean, it's good in that way. I mean, listen, usually when it comes to the global South countries, the military is a party of reaction, and they usually work at the behest of the oligarchies in these countries.
Mhm.
So what we see in Venezuela, just based on this the conversation we're having here, is that you had a left administration that was basically able to incorporate the military into their administrative apparatus, which kind of puts the oligarchy and the elites at on the defense. But at the same time, one of the things about the militaries is that usually it comes with a degree of graft, corruption, and an attempt to kind of use the state apparatus to load itself down because the military is a part of the state apparatus. So it's no question that it's a double-edged sword. I'm not a big fan of necessarily having to depend on the military for a left political project, but as a means of neutralizing oligarchical opposition or from the capitalist power structure, it's definitely the best quiver, arrow you can have in your quiver.
Do you have a follow up to that, Camilo?
No, I think the curious thing in Peru, like the before Castillo, I suppose the only kind of left-wing government in quotes was the government of of a revolutionary government of the armed forces, which did the agrarian reform, and it was a military government. So I feel it kind of diverges from country to country because in some countries like the army is more left leaning, in others, so it diverges. But yeah, I think that sometimes when it comes from soldiers in the base, some of them are slightly more left leaning. But as we have seen in Bolivia, sometimes that's not the case, and also like when the leadership remains being fairly right wing, it's kind of difficult to kind of challenge that. So it is a very kind of complicated process, and every country has its own particularities. But it has been the kind of central problem, I guess, for the left, which and AMLO is doing something like that in Mexico in some way, even if it's very different. But he is putting a lot of centrality in the military, which is something that I guess surprised many people, but it's not that strange if one sees the logic behind it.
I mean, when you want to talk about corruption, I mean, Mexico is known for, a corrupt military and police
I don't
force.
think you want to be saying that in your current.
I was going to say wonderful people. They're right down the hill from me. I wave to them all the time. I see them help old ladies across the street. So AMLO's fixed it. Corruption's over. Mexico's a great country, and there's no problems here. Moving on. We are at an hour, and it is time for us to head into the patron-only bonus champagne room call-in segment of the show. Are you ready to take some calls, Camilo?
Yes.
Pascal and I both during this show called you Pedro Castillo, so I just want you to know that we both did it. So it is a black thing, and you will understand.
Yeah.
M. Toussaint, do you have any parting words?
No parting words. Yeah, we'll be sure to. We have all your links in the chat. We'll put them up in the description as well. Yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to your podcast.
Camilo's great. I found Camilo through Derek Varn, so shout out to Derek Varn.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And I feel very honored every time Camilo comes on the show and drops all the knowledge. But I do want to get into this Ecuador conversation and the native peoples of Ecuador and their uprising, what they were able to do with the natural resources out there. Thank you guys for watching. We will be back Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific time, where we'll be talking to a young man running for office in Oklahoma. I believe he's only 22, Gregory Harden. He interviewed me for his podcast either earlier this year or late last year. I can't remember. He's a young black man that loves his heavy music. So he wanted to talk to me about heavy music, and we didn't even really talk about his political aspirations, but we will be talking about his run for office in
Green Corn
Oklahoma.
Rebellion. That's
I'm
a show.
sorry?
Green Corn Rebellion.
What rebellion?
Green Corn Rebellion. Is that his show?
Oh, is that his show? I don't remember what it's called.
I think so.
Little Negro. Is it called Little Negro? What is the show? No. He's probably watching this. He's gonna get mad at me. I'm gonna get a message from him. That's okay. He knew he was short. And on that note, we are out.